This video will demonstrate the Level 2 homework assignment for Chapter 2 that begins on page 156. So we are a potential restaurant owner and we want to decide where's the best place to place a restaurant that we're interested in opening. So we're looking at Site X and Site Y. And for Site X and Site Y, we hired a demographic firm that has researched the population that live in those areas to determine what would be the best place to place this restaurant. In addition, the case gives you on page 157 some information about age categories and income levels for the population in those two areas. So let's go ahead and get the data for this. Let's go to from the home page, we're going to go to weekly information and homework, and then we'll go to week 3, which is where chapter 2 begins. And of course I need the data information for that. So here is the La Rosa demographic analysis, and so this shows you the results of the homework assignment. This is the way it should look when you're all finished. Now I didn't give you the formulas, but the way it should look is there, so you can kind of get an idea of how to set up the homework. Alright, but we need the La Rosa spreadsheet, so I'm going to click on that and open it up. Let that open. And if you get this message to enable editing, just do that, and let's maximize that spreadsheet. Alright, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it in the video. I'll try to remember to do that. Now we have 3 tabs at the bottom. We have Site X, Site Y, and then we just have Sheet 3. And you'll see as we go through this homework assignment that we need to create a couple of tabs here on the bottom. So here we have Site X, and it's giving us the respondent number. It's just a number that the demographic company assigned to each of the respondents. The age category, the income, the number of desserts that they purchase per month eating out, and the number of meals that they purchase per month when they eat out. Then we have another tab, Site Y, and we'll make that one bigger as well. So I'm going to zoom into that so you can see it. And we have the same information that the company gathered. So this is just a bunch of data that somebody gathered, and we're going to do some analysis with it. Alright, I'm going to open up a PowerPoint that came with the chapter, and I'll start putting these on the website for you so you can, maybe the PowerPoint will help you. But the chapter introduces, let me make this bigger, introduces some statistical concepts that you should be familiar with. These are things that you probably learned about, you learned a little bit about in high school and maybe some of your beginning math classes. So in this chapter we're going to use the mean, which is the arithmetic average of a set of numbers, the medium, which is a value in the middle, the mode is the number that occurs most frequently, and the standard deviation is how closely together the values are dispersed from the arithmetic mean. And then the normal distribution, the definition of that is the mean, median, and mode are the same value. So what does all that mean? So when you have a set of data, as we saw, we had a set of data in that spreadsheet that we were looking at over here. So here's Site X, and this is a set of data. So if we have a set of data, income levels and times that people eat out per month and how many desserts they buy per month, then we can do some sort of statistical analysis on that. So for example, you could take the average is the same as the mean, and it's represented here of how many times somebody, a family might eat out, and how far away from the average does that particular data point fall on the graph. So this is a graph for a normal distribution that is a standard deviation of 2. And so what that means is here, if we go from the mean is a 5, so here you can see you have a -2, about here is a 1, 0, I'm sorry, a -1 is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can see right here the mean is a 5. And so this is actually like a typical standard deviation of 2 drawing. And so if we have a standard deviation of 2 and the mean is 5, it means it's going to go all the way out to here, and it would include all of these data points that fall under that curve. If you have a standard deviation of 1, that's represented right here to the left of it and right here to the right of it. So that's the depiction of where all of the data points would fall within here a standard deviation of 1, and that sets a limit, like an acceptable limit when you're looking at a set of data. Manufacturing firms use standard deviations all the time to say, we're producing a pair of shoes, for example. I'm a manufacturing firm that produces shoes, and they have to be a certain quality, and they have to fall within a certain standard deviation of variance in order for it to be acceptable and not be rejected. So it's a level of tolerance that you're willing to accept before you say, hey, I need to reject that. All right, here's another example of a non-normal distribution with amino 5. And that's because the data points is kind of skewed, isn't it? So we've got a whole bunch of data points that are coming out this way. And that's what you'll hear. It says a tail of values at one end of the distribution. So we're not getting a nice normal, what we saw over here, a nice normal curve. And this isn't really related to any sort of data in the chapter or any sort of manufacturing firm. It's not related to the De La Rosa. It's just a normal curve with a standard deviation of 2. This is how it would normally look. You can see when you have a standard deviation of 1, you're going to have less tolerance, and so it gets taller. So the curve is taller. All right, on this one, you have a mean, once again, that's with amino 5, but the data is kind of falling out this way and falling out this way, so you don't have a nice normal curve. Okay, I wanted to just touch on that a little bit. Your book touches very little on, just a little bit on the normal distribution of a standard deviation curve, and so you need to look at that and try to understand it, but that was a brief explanation of that. So let's go back to Excel. We've got our data sheet here. We've got site X and site Y, and we're going to look and see what the book has the chapter is asking us to do for this homework assignment. So on page 157, it says we need to open the workbook named La Rosa and rename it as Rosa Demographic Analysis, and of course save it somewhere where you can find it. So I'm just going to do a file and save as, and I'm going to put it somewhere where I can find it. So I've got my folders in here. Spring and my IS. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to call it La Rosa. Alright, and it's going to save as a file type .xlsx, which is what they tell you to do. Here's your file type, and I'll just hit save. Now, one thing about file types, sometimes you want to save it as a PDF. You can save your files with different file types if that's what you were instructed to do. But here we want to just go ahead and let it default to the normal, which is the Excel workbook. So we're going to save that. Step 2 says on the site X and site Y worksheets, we need to create a formula that will rank each of the responses for the number of meals they eat out per month and the number of desserts they eat out per month. So they're wanting to find out the rank of where all of this falls. So it's asking you if I have an income, I'm a respondent number 1000, and my age category is 22 to 25, and I have a $5,000 income, how many desserts do I eat out per month, and how many meals do I eat out per month? Let's look at somebody that has a $100,000 income. Then you can see that they have found out that this particular respondent eats dessert out 12 times a month, and they eat out 4 times a month. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Somebody with a $20,000 income eats out dessert 14 times a month, and they eat out 7 times a month for a whole meal. So they're asking us to rank those responses. So we're going to do this in cell F, and we're going to call this rank by dessert. Rank by the number of desserts that a respondent purchases each month. And then the next one will be a rank by number of meals. Alright, I can make that look a little better. I can come up here and make column F larger so I can see the whole thing there. And it's going to get pretty big when I do that, but I think we'll go ahead and do it that way. Another way you can do that, if you just wanted the heading to be a little bit smaller, you can double click in there and hold your hold the function key down. That's on my keyboard, it's an FN. You hold that down, put where you want to break that heading, hold the function key down and hit enter. Oops, it's not the function key, it's the alt key. So I can click up here, or I can click right here in the cell, between the words, hold my alt key down and hit enter, and you can see how you can make that wrap. So that's one way to make it wrap. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to make that wrap, so I'm going to hold my alt key down, ALT key, hit my enter key, hit enter again, and it accepts it. So a different way to make that look. Right, if I wanted that to go back the way it was, I can come up here in the formula bar, put my cursor right next and hit the delete key, and then that will take that wrapping away. And the reason it's still wrapping is because you need to make it bigger there. Let me do that again. It didn't work. There we go. Alright, now we can make this smaller, so we'll do it like that. Alright, so the formula that they presented to you in the book is to use the rank. We're going to rank a series of data. So the formula for that, if you just start typing equals rank, and it's right here. Here's the function rank. So when you, of course Excel, when you start typing the equal sign, it's going to give you suggestions for what you're typing in. So I just typed equal. If I do that again, R-A-N, I can see the equal rank appears here. I'm going to double click on that to accept it. So that gives me, when I double click that, it gives me a hint of how I need to create this formula. So you can see right here, it says rank parentheses number, comma, the reference, comma, and then the order. So what that's saying is equals rank is the function that we're going to use, the function in Excel, and we're going to tell it that we want to look at a particular cell, so that's the number, and then what we're going to do with the rest of it is you put a comma to indicate that that's the cell you want to use, and then the reference that we're going to, the series of cells that we're going to look at, that the program is going to look at to rank it. So in this case, I want to know what rank this particular respondent falls in the whole slew of data that we've got. So I have an open parentheses, that means I'm going to put some sort of data in there. So I'm going to click on D2. So I'm choosing that I want to rank this number 4 and see where that falls in this whole set of data. So I have D2, and then it tells me down here in the bottom, this formula help, that once I select a cell reference, then I need to put a comma to move on to the rest of it. So then I put a comma, and you can see that it's putting in a bold face. So you did this part, you have the rank, open parentheses, number, put a comma, and you don't put any spaces in these formulas, no spaces. And then it's highlighting reference is the next part that you need to do. So we need to tell it what cells we want it to look at to rank. So where does this number 4 fall in all of the respondents that responded on how many desserts they eat per month? So you can see that would be kind of hard because we have 108 data points to look at. So when you use a formula in Excel, it makes it quick to look at that particular set of data. So now I'm going to tell it what is the reference what do I want to refer to when I'm ranking cell D2. So I'm going to just click on cell D2 and I'm going to copy it all the way. I'm going to click and hold, and I'm dragging that down. So I want to know where that particular respondent who said they ate desserts, they bought desserts eating out 4 times a month. Where do they fall in this whole slew of data that we've got? So I go from cell D, whatever it was up there, all the way to cell D08. I'm going to let go of it. When I go back up, you can see that it said, I want to see where the rank is, that cell for 4. How does that rank in the whole data set from D2 to D108? Now, because I want to be able to copy formulas, I need to give this some sort of cell referencing. I can either make it a relative. Right now it's relative, and if I try to copy this without putting any sort of absolute value to it, or a mixed reference, and this is what we learned in this chapter, is a mixed reference. So by hitting F4, I turn that into $D, $2, all the way down to $D, $108, D108. If I click F4 again, And so what would happen? What would happen if I copied that formula across? What you would see happen is that when I went down to cell, when I copied that formula down in here, this would never move, which is what we want. And so that would work. That would work well for this particular column of data that I'm looking at. But what if I want to use that formula to go and do the same formula without having to recreate it for the meals? It would still look at, it would move to cell E2, but it would keep the data that I was looking at for D2 to D108. When I copy the formula into column E, I also want the formula to move into, say, now I want you to look at the data from E3 to E108. So the way you do that, I just a second ago hit the F4, which turns this into an absolute value, which anchors it. It anchors it. Every time I copy that formula down, it's going to anchor that that range of cells, D2 to D108. And it won't try to move it down every time I try to copy it down. We did this in the last chapter as well. And I demonstrated that in some of your homework assignments. But in this case, I want to use a mixed cell reference because I want to be able to copy that formula from column D to column E. So by hitting F4 again, I get a mixed cell reference. So then I end up with D $2 to D $108. And you can, and this is kind of a toggle key, F4. You can always type it in by hand if you want to, but it's easier to use that toggle key. So if I hit F4 one more time, you can see now it's trying to anchor just the D, and it's going to let that 2 and that 108 move down, which we don't want that. We want the cells 2 to 108 to remain constant. And by putting the $ in front of the D instead of the 2, it would try to move that to be a D3, D4, D5, D6, and the same thing here. So I'm going to hit F4 one more time, and it puts it back normal. I hit F4 one more time, and I have my full absolute value again. Hit F4 one more time, and this is actually the one that I want. So when I copy this formula over into column G, because I want it to look at column E to do the same thing for the meals, this will work. So this is called a mixed cell reference. It will anchor the 2 and the 108, but it will let the D, when I copy it across, the row across to column G, and it's going to move across for E, and I'll get those cell references instead. So that's the difference between an absolute cell reference and a mixed cell reference. So have I got everything in the formula? I have equals rank, parentheses number, and the reference, the range of cells that I want to look at, so it's 2 to 108 in that column D, and then I want to know what the order is. So I'm done with that formula, and I just close my parentheses to tell the program that I'm finished, and I hit enter. Alright, so when I do that, it returns a result of 53. You'll notice up here in the formula bar that here's my formula. Alright, now I want to copy that across to G, to column G, so that it will automatically do the same thing for the number of meals eaten per month. So the fast way to do that is just grab this little dot in the corner, click and hold, and drag it across. Now let's look and see what that looks like. So did it do as I suggested? So it did. It went ahead and it moved because I copied it. I copied the row across into the next column, and because of the way I anchored it, it allowed it to do that. So you can see that it moved it because I had not made D2, and that here we had D2. By copying it over, it automatically moved to the right and grabbed the information that was in cell E2, and then it went ahead and did, and then we've got D2 to D108, you'll notice, but when I click in column G, now it went ahead and automatically moved the cell reference from D to E, which is what I want, but it kept, because I put a $ in front of 2 and a $ in front of the 108, it went ahead and knew that that's what I wanted to anchor. I wanted to let the column move, but I didn't want to have the rows move. So that's called a mixed reference. Now I can copy both of these down at the same time and get the information for the whole data set. So I'm just grabbing the little dot in the corner, clicking it, holding it, and dragging it down. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, of course, is to click on this. I'm going to hit undo here. so you can see that. So I'm back to where I was. I have my two formulas set up. I can drag it here. Here's my little dot there in the corner. Let it turn into a dark plus sign. Click and hold and drag it down. You could also right click and copy. And then I can tell it that I can click and hold where I want to copy it to. Let go of it. Right click and paste. So different ways to do it. And I'm just going to hit my escape key to take that selection away. So a couple of ways to copy down. You also have your clipboard over here where you can click on a cell that you want to copy, click copy, and then you can click and hold and tell it to paste that in. So different ways to do things. So that's all we had to do for site X. And so what this is saying is that the rank by the number of desserts is if you had 4 desserts per month, that would be a rank of 53 in that whole data set. So we can see that if you chose 12, that rank would be 23. In order of times, we've got a rank of 23 for how many times somebody chooses to eat desserts in the month. So the same thing with the meals. So we're done with site X. That's what we had to do for this. We might just format that a little bit because that looks a little funny. Make sure everything's looking okay. Alright, let's go to site Y, and we have to do the same thing for site Y. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to put in rank by number of desserts. It's going to be the same exact thing. And now I'll have the rank by number of meals. Can make that bigger. And this is how the illustration was, the PDF that I sent you on the way this should look. Alright, so we're going to do the same thing with this. We're going to create a formula, just like we did on site X, and now we're on site Y, of course. And we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to type equals rank, and we want this one, equals rank. Double click it. It opens up the formula help, and I want to tell it I want this cell. Put a comma to say I'm done selecting my cell, and then I need to select the reference, the range of cells that I want to reference it to. So in this case it's going to be D2 all the way to the bottom of the data set. Okay, all the way down to D108. So here's my formula. It's building up here. And once again, I want to turn that into an a mixed cell reference. So I'm going to click F4 once. It puts the dollar signs in, but I want it to be a mixed cell reference that allows the column to move, but it keeps the row reference intact. So you can see how we only have one dollar sign here. And that's what I want. I'm happy with that formula, so I'm going to close the parentheses and hit enter to accept it. Alright, I'm going to copy that across. So I'm going to click that little dot in the corner, in the bottom right hand corner, click and hold and drag it across. And we'll notice that when I did that, and I look at that cell, that I did get the E reference. Never hurts to check when you're copying formulas, making sure that you're getting the result that you want. Alright, so I'm going to click and hold, drag across 2 cells there, let go of it. Grab the little dot in the corner, click and hold, and drag it down. Alright, so that takes care of step 2 of the homework assignment. Alright, so I'm just going to click to get rid of that highlighting, and we'll come back and we'll do some formatting with this. I'm going to fix this because that S, when I had it like this, you can see that the S is kind of hanging out there. That doesn't look very nice. So you can do some formatting on this on your own. Alright, so step 3 says on page 157, on a separate worksheet named Compare, they want us to display and compare and calculate the difference and percent difference of the mean and standard deviation for the data sets. So we've got data set for site X and the data set for site Y. So now we're going to create a tab in this worksheet, and we're going to call it Compare. So I'm going to rename that. So I double clicked down here in the tab, and I'm going to call it Compare. Now hopefully you can see that, and I'll make this a little bit bigger too so we can see what's going on here. I'm going to get up to the top, And it says, on the same worksheet, set up a table to list the 4 highest number of desserts per month for each data set and the 10 lowest number of meals eaten out by each respondent. So we've got a few things to do here. They want us to calculate the mean and the standard deviation for each of those data sets in site X and site Y. And then they want us to calculate a difference and a percent difference. So we learned in chapter 1 that a percent difference is the first year, for example, minus the second year, and you divide it by the first year to get the data, to get the percent difference. So the way I'm going to set this up is I've got site X, site Y, and I need desserts and number of meals, and I need a mean and standard deviation for each of those. So I know that I need to have a mean. I'm going to come down here a little bit, and I need a standard deviation calculation. Alright, so you can name that, you can abbreviate however you want to do. And I have number of desserts. Okay, and that's kind of flowing into another sheet, so I'm going to double click B. If I double click up here between the B and the C, I can automatically size that. So I need the number of desserts and the number of meals. Alright, and I'm going to enter there and size that. And then I have for site X, so this is going to be for site X, so I'm just going to call that site X. I didn't need a highlight, so I'm going to click and hold and kind of center that over the 2. And the way that I do that, click and hold, here in the alignment group, we have something called merge and center, so I'm going to hit merge and center, and that's going to center that over those 2 columns there. Alright, now I need the same thing for site Y. So I'm just going to make this easy on myself. I'm going to copy it and paste it here. Instead of having site X there, I'm going to call that site Y. Alright, and it automatically did that merge for me because I copied it from here, so it merged those cells there as well. Then I need a difference for both of those. This is kind of hanging over, so I was going to size column E. Then I need the difference for the desserts and the meals. So number of desserts, I'm going to size that. Number of desserts here, I can copy that again and paste it here. And I'm going to paste it again here. Alright, now I can size a bunch of those all at once. I want to size all of these. So I'm going to click and hold. You have to click and hold over the column heading F. You have to actually be in F. Click, hold, drag across, and then I can just go in any one of those, the little line in between each of those columns, I can choose any one and it will size all of those all at once. So I'm going to make this a little smaller so you can see it. So it sized it all at once very nicely. So site Y, once again I need to, I can just copy this now. I have site X and site Y. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste it here. So some quick ways to get that done. I have site X and site Y, except here I actually want this to be the difference. And I want this to be the percentage difference. Alright. Alright, I actually want to pull this up. I have an extra line here that I don't want. So the quick way to do that is to click on the number 3, and then you can come over here and hit delete sheet rows. Now, if you're on a full keyboard that has the 10 key, you can hold your control key down, click like on cell 3, hold the control key down and hit control minus, and that gets rid of it as well. Fast way to do it. I use it all the time. Now that we have that set up, we're going to go ahead and input the formulas for this portion of this section 3 of the homework. So I need to calculate the mean for site X and the standard deviation for site X, and then do the same for site Y. Then it's easy to get the differences. It'll just be X minus Y or Y minus X, depending on how we want to look at that. And then we will do the second part of the assignment. So the mean, as we learned from our PowerPoint, we'll go back to this. Our mean is just the arithmetic average of a set of numbers. Alright, so we've done that before. We've used the average in chapter 1, so I'm going to hit equals, and if I start typing out average, it comes up, and here it is. Here's the function for average. And it also gives you a description. I want you to notice that. Okay, so I'm going to double click average to say that, and when I double click it, it puts the formula in there and it gives me some hints on how I need to build this formula. So I need to know what I'm referencing and the range of cells that I want to use for that. So I want site X. I want the average for site X. I'm going to click over here on site X. And when I do that, you can see that it's pulling in site X and it's putting an exclamation point after that. It's just saying I'm using this tab, site X tab, to do this. And I want the number of desserts. So I want the range of cells that are in in column D. So I need all of that, all of the data that's in column D. So I'm going to click on D2 and go all the way down to D108. So I'm just getting all of those numbers and I'm going to take an average of those. Alright, and then I just close my parentheses. Made a mistake. I need D108, and then I'm going to close my parentheses. I clicked on the wrong key when I did that, that's why I didn't take it. And I'm going to accept that. Alright, so my formula, when I click on that, is equals average. Clicked on site X, told it I wanted it to look at D2 all the way to D108, close my parentheses, and it returns the result. Alright, let's, does it tell us anywhere to how many decimal places to do that? I don't think it does, but we're going to just go ahead and choose 2 decimal places. So in my number formatting group, I can reduce those number of decimals. Here's the increased decimals, and here's the decreased decimals. So I'm going to just decrease that down to 2 decimal places by clicking on that until I get 2 decimal places. Alright, now let's calculate the number of meals. So I can do the same thing. I can just copy this across, and notice what happens when I do that. It took the average of site X for E2 to E108. Remember, this was D2 to D108, so that's pretty cool. I can just click that little thing in that little dot in the corner, click and hold and copy across, and it automatically, intuitively knows that I want to go to the right because I don't have any absolute values restraining it from moving to the right. So I go to Site X tab, and up here it moved from column D to column E when I copied that formula across in my compare tab, in my compare spreadsheet. Alright, so pretty neat. It does that automatically. Now let's do the standard deviation. For that set of data, when we let Excel calculate the standard deviation mathematically can be a difficult calculation, but Excel will just do it for you as long as you tell it what data you want it to look at. So it's very similar to the way that we just did the average, except we're going to use the standard deviation function. So I'm going to start a formula. I'm going to click down here in cell B4 to tell Excel I'm going to start a formula by typing equals and then start typing standard deviation. Alright, so here we have STD deviation, and we want deviation, standard deviation .s. So I'm going to double click that, and it's giving me a hint. So I need the standard deviation calculation, and I have to give it a range of cells. So once again, I'm going to click on site X, it pulls it up here into the formula, and I want cell D2 all the way down to D108, just like we had before. Go ahead and enter, and when I entered, it took the formula. So I have the standard deviation. This is the standard formula for it. Told it I want it to look at the Site X tab from cell D2 to D108. And once again, I can calculate the standard deviation for that by just copying it across. So here, when I had it, it has the D columns, and when I copied it across, it intuitively knew that I needed to move to the right. It updated it and changed it to the column E. Alright, once again, we're going to format both of those cells to be 2 decimal places. I'm just clicking that several times to get it down to 2 decimal places. Alright, so now I need to do the same thing for site Y. So I need the mean for site Y. So I'm going to type in equals average. Instead of clicking on Site X tab, I'm going to click on the Site Y tab. And once again, I want it to be from cell D2 all the way down to 108. So I'm clicking and holding and dragging, getting to the bottom of the data set. Let go of it, hit enter, and it enters the formula. So I want the average of the tab site Y from D2 to D108. I can copy that across, and it does it for the meals. Moved from column D here we had column D. When I copied it over into column E, it moved to the E cells for that site Y tab. Standard deviation, the standard formula is equals the standard deviation, and I can go ahead and accept that function by double clicking it. I want site Y, and once again I want it from the top of the data set, so it's going to calculate the standard deviation for that. It's not letting me grab it here. Sometimes it does that. So I'm going to actually type that in because it was putting the hint right where I needed it. It got confused there. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to just delete that and do that again. I can type it in by hand if I wanted to. I think I will type it in by hand this time just to illustrate. So I'm going to type in equals the standard deviation dot S. I'm going to double click that, and then open parentheses, and I want to click on the tab down here, site Y. And up here, see how it's not letting me grab that because it's putting the help right on top of the cell that I need. So I'm going to just type that up here, and this time I can just type in D2, and then you can put a dot or a colon. It will take it either way, all the way to D108. Close my parentheses, and it will insert that formula. Okay. Alright, so here's my formula. I'm going to grab that little dot and move it across so it will calculate the standard deviation in column E as well. So from site Y, we have the mean and the standard deviation for the desserts, and the mean and the standard deviation for the meals. So what that's saying on the standard deviation is in that whole data set, the standard deviation is 6. So if we were looking at this over here, we found out that the mean is a 7. Let's format all of these cells before I forget. We're going to change all of those to 2 decimal places. So I'm just double clicking in my numbers group, the decrease decimals. What that's saying is that I have a mean of 7.23 and the standard deviation is 6.17 for site Y. Right, so if we were looking at our normal curve on this PowerPoint, we would say that the mean is 7.23 and the standard deviation is 6.17. Right, so it would look a little, the mean would be right here at 7.23 for site Y, and then you would have 6 standard deviation points, 3 to each side of it basically. You have 3, here is the mean, and you would have a standard deviation of 3 on each side, which equals 6 for standard deviation. So it's just a way to say what, and if it falls outside of that curve, then that's something that is odd based on that data set that you've got. Something falls outside of the curve, it could be an odd number, because it should fall for the most part within that normal curve. Alright, so let's go back to that. Now we need to calculate the difference between site X and site Y. Alright, so I just want the difference. So I don't want a negative difference here if I can avoid it. So I'm going to take the big number minus the small number. In this case, site Y is slightly larger than site X, and it's the same thing for the standard deviation. Here we have 6.17 and 6.66. So here the standard deviation is a little higher on site X. So you may get a negative result in there. So you want to be consistent. Whichever way you're going to do your difference, you want to make sure that you maintain that consistency. So if I'm calculating the difference and I'm going to go from site Y to site X, then I need to do the same thing for whatever other statistical data that I'm looking at. So I'm going to go from site Y to site X. I need to do the same thing, go from site Y to site X. So all I have to do is click equals, and I'm going to say I want to know what the difference is on cell D3 minus cell B3. And I'm just clicking. You could also just hand type that in. All right. And then for the number of meals, I want to take this. So I'm going to start a formula. I'm going to hit equals. The number of meals is this minus cell C3. So I've got cell E3 minus cell C3. And it's returning the formula up here, and we'll get an answer. And you end up with 3.38 there. So that's the difference. Then we need the standard deviation. I can just copy that because I don't have any absolute cell references, the relative cell references. When I copy those two cell references down, it will automatically calculate and update. So I just copied it down, click and held, and grab the little dot there in the corner, click the little dot, hold it, and copy it down. So that's what I get. Because I didn't have any dollar signs in front of those cell references when I copied them, they're just relative cell references, it automatically looked for the cell below it and to the right of it. Alright, so the percent difference. So remember, the percent difference is just your difference between a set of data, between two numbers, divided by the original number. Alright, so I'm going to take the answer that we got here. So I'm going to tell it I want to take the percent difference, or I'm just going to write a formula for that. So I'm going to hit equals to indicate I'm going to start a formula, and I want the difference, the result of that difference, and I want to divide it by the original data set, which was set B5 here for site X. So F3 divided by B3 and hit enter. And then I want to do the same thing for the meals out. So I need the difference, so I'm going to hit equals, and I want to reference cell G, the difference that I had just calculated, divided by the original, which is this, C3, and hit enter. Now I can copy those two cells down. I can just click and hold, drag across, get both of them at the same time, and copy that down. Now I've got all of those cells highlighted. I'm going to just turn them into 2 decimal places. So I'm going to click so that it's all 2 decimal places. Actually, what I want in there is, instead of decimal places, I actually want to turn it into a percent. So I'm going to click on percent here, and you could go ahead and increase that so that you can see 1 or 2 decimal places. When I'm dealing with percents, I usually like to take it out to a couple of decimal places so you can get more of a precise percentage number. Alright, the second part of step 3 asks us to list the highest number of desserts per month and the highest number and the lowest number of meals per month. So the way that we do that, we're going to set up another table in here, and I'm going to have we'll just put it here, the highest number of desserts per month for site X and site Y. So I have site X and site Y, and that is going to compare the highest number of desserts for the month. So I'm going to just make myself a reference here. Alright, and I'm going to center that over that. So I'm going to click and hold, and in my home group, I've got, in my alignment group, I have this merge and center. So I can merge and center that across those 2 sites. Right, then we also need site X and site Y. I'm just going to copy that and paste that right here. Oh, oops, let me undo that. I want to copy it and then paste it here. I'm having troubles here. I'm going to copy that one and paste it here. Okay, I wasn't grabbing both at the same time. And this is going to be the lowest number of meals per month. And just to format that a little bit, we'll center that across the cell as well, merge and center. Okay, so there we go. Now, what your book tells you is that you have to, in order to make this use this large formula and also the small formula, that you have to set up a ranking. And so the easiest way to do that is just to give yourself a set of numbers. So we have to go all the way to 10. So I'm going to just put a 1 and a 2 here, and I want that to copy all the way down. So I could type 1, I'm going to do that again. I could type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth till I get to 10. But can you imagine if you had to do 100 of those? It would be pretty time consuming. So the faster way to do that is just to start, you want to copy a series of numbers. You can type a 1, a 2, and then you can just copy that down. Okay, so a fast way to get a set of numbers really quick. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate that one more time. If I just have a, I want to show you what will happen. If I just have a 1 here and I try to copy that down, Excel doesn't know what you want to do with it. So you just get a whole bunch of the same numbers. If I put like a 1 and a 2 and then I try to copy that down, it still doesn't quite know what I want to do. So see, it's just copying that down. So by typing a 1 and then a 2, I can grab both of those, and then it knows I'm wanting to do a series of numbers. And then it will let me do that. Okay? Alright, so on step 3, it wants us to determine, it says to set up a table to list the 4 highest number of desserts per month for each data set. So for the highest number of desserts for site X and site Y. And we want just the top 4. So the large function is a function that you can use to find the highest or the most often ranking number in a large set of data. So if we had to go through all of those 107 lines or 106 lines, that would be a pretty tedious task to look at a large data set and try to find out what number is the highest in that set of data. So you can use the large function to help you with that, to look at a large set of data and determine what is the highest numbers in that set of data. So the way that we do that is with the large function. So I'm going to hit equals large, and when I start typing it, it pulls it in right here. And it gives you a description. It says it returns the K, the some value, the largest value in a data set. For example, the 5th largest number. So it's going to prompt us when I select that. It's going to show us how to set that up. So I have to define the array. What set of numbers do I want to look at? That's the array. And then I have to tell it how do I want to rank it. And that's what the K stands for. The K stands for how do I want to rank it. Alright, so by setting this up, I actually need to have this set of ranking here. In this case, I want the highest first, second, third, and fourth ranking. And I can get that by setting this up and referring to this cell, which tells it the K will become that cell that's sitting in A8. So I have to set up my ranking criteria. And that's what we did right here by saying we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In this first part, we just want the 4 highest. So I'm going to tell it, I'm just going to copy that formula down to this cell that corresponds to that 4, and then I'll get the first, second, third, and fourth highest. And then I have to just tell the formula what set of data do I want to look at. Alright, so far I've started the formula, I'm using the large function, and I'm going to tell it what large set of data do I want to look at. So the open parentheses is the indication to the program that I'm going to define a set of cells to look at. In this case, we're looking at site X. So I have my open parentheses. I'm going to click on the tab that has site X, and then I want to look at the number of desserts per month, because we wanted to look at the highest number of desserts per month. Alright, so I need to look at this array all the way from cell D2 all the way down to cell D108. And I want to go ahead and turn that into a mixed reference. So I'm going to hit F4. It turns it into an absolute value, which would work, but I'm going to hit it one more time, and so that's going to tell it I want to look from cell D2 to D108. And I'm going to anchor the 2 and the 108. So if I copy this across, then it will automatically move the D to an E, but keep the 2 to the 108 as the cell reference. So mixed reference as opposed to absolute value, which would have anchored the D and not let it move to the E if I were to copy it. Alright, when I'm done with that, then the other part of the formula, I'm going to put a comma here. So I'm clicking up here in the formula bar, and I'm going to put a comma, and then I have to tell it what is that K value. What is that K value? And in this case, I'm going to go back to the compare. So now I'm telling it I want to look. So see how my formula is building? I've got the large function. I want to look at tab site X, that worksheet site X from cell D2 to D108. Then I want to come back to the compare, which is this one, the compare tab, and I want it to rank it in the first value, the highest value. So I'm going to click A1, A8, which has the number 1 in it, and it's going to indicate that 1, it's going to look to that for that nth, that K value. So here's the array, which is the number of the cells that I want to look at, and then how do I want to rank it? That's the K. You have to define the K. Then I'm going to close my parentheses, and I defined that K, by the way, by choosing a 1 right here. First highest value will be a 1. So I want to close my parentheses to indicate I'm done. I'm up here in the formula bar or down here. Close the parentheses and hit enter to accept it. So what that did is it returned a value of 25. Returned a value of 25. And so in that whole set of data from over 100 lines of data, we can see that the number 25 occurred the most often. So the highest desserts per month was 25. Now I can copy that down, and it's going to move that cell reference. It's going to anchor this D2 to D108. It's going to hold that column, but it's going to move that ranking to 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to grab that little dot in the corner, click and hold, and drag it down. And so it returned the results. If you'll notice up here, the original formula, I had an A8. Now I have a cell A9, A10, and then we have A11. So it's returning that fourth is the K, that K value in the formula. Alright, so now we need to do the same thing for site Y. Now the easy way to do this would just be to copy this across. I'm just going to copy the first one. I'm going to copy this across, and instead of clicking and holding and dragging that all over the place, all I have to do is come up here in the formula, and I'm going to tell it that I want to change that from site X. I'm not going to look at the tab site X. Now I'm going to look at the tab site Y. So I can edit the formula that way and hit enter. And here I have site, did something wrong. I'm going to undo that. Alright, this is correct. Let me just double check. I'm going to copy that across. Now I want to look at just this cell, and I want to edit the site X up here in the formula and make that site Y, and it should update for me. Alright, and sure enough it did. Okay, so here's a perfect illustration of where I made a mistake. Because you'll notice in site X I was using the column D, and here when I copied that across, because I had not anchored that as an absolute value for the whole thing, I should have. Because it went ahead and moved it, it let it break that mixed cell reference and move it to column E. So I can fix that up here by hand, or you could recreate the whole formula, but I'm going to fix it up here. Just change that to a D, and change this one to a D. And I want to compare absolute of B8, and that's a 1, that's what I want, and I'm going to hit enter to accept that. Alright, so I made a mistake, checked my data, and I can correct that by hand is what I wanted to illustrate. Alright, I'm still seeing a problem with this formula though, because when I copied it across, so this is a good illustration of how you have to be really careful when you're copying across. So I'm making a mistake here, but I think it causes it will demonstrate how you have to be really, really careful. So when I just did a straight copy across from here to here, look what happened to my formula. It also moved that B8. Over here I needed to stay in cell A8. Because I hadn't anchored that cell A8 by turning it into an absolute value, when I copied it over, it automatically moved to column B, which I didn't want. So I'm going to change that to column A. So that's how you can edit a formula by hand, and you have to be really careful when you're copying. But let's go through that one more time. I'm going to take that away. We're going to do it the hard way, the other way. and we're going to go ahead and use the large function. So I'm going to hit equals large, and we're getting our help here of what it will do. I want to select that formula, so I'm going to double click when that help comes up, double click it, and it puts in the function equals large, open parentheses. Now once again, I'm looking at site Y this time, so I'm going to come down here, click on site Y, and I also want to look at the number of desserts as well for site Y. So I'm going to click and hold and tell it what array of data I want to look at, all the way down to 108. I'm going to hit enter, not enter because I'm not done with the formula. Then you have to actually type in a comma, and then we're going to click on the compare, and we have to tell it what that K value is. So we want it to rank it with the highest number, number 1. So using the compare spreadsheet with this cell, then I'm going to close my parentheses and hit enter. Alright, so now I've got that set up. So a couple of ways. We could have done it by hand, and we copied across, and then I could fix by hand. Be really careful when you're copying across. If you don't have your mixed references, your absolute cell references, or your relative cell references set up quickly, you can have problems. So just be careful with that. Click and hold the little dot in the corner, and we're going to drag that down to get the four largest in that data set. Alright, now we want the lowest number of meals per month for site X and site Y. So instead of using the large, and the directions on step 3 say that they want the 10 lowest number of meals eaten out by respondent for each of the data sets X and Y. So that's there, and still on step 3. We're still working on step 3 of the homework assignment. And so this time I'm going to use the small function, and it's the same concept as when we were using large function. So in this case, we want to get the 10 lowest number of meals eaten out by the respondents. So remember, this is all relating back to the age categories. We've got income levels and age categories for the different groups of people that they surveyed. So this time I'm going to use the small function, so I'm going to type, and that's why I had 10. I have 10 out here, even though in this first part I only used the first 4 rankings. Here I'm going to use 10 rankings, and 1 to 10 being the lowest, 1 to 10, and because I'm using the small function, I'll get a different result. So I'm going to hit equals small, and here it is, and you're kind of getting the same help here. It says it returns the K smallest value in a data set, for example the 5th smallest element. So that's what I want. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and I want the first 10 smallest numbers. Over here we were getting the first 4 largest numbers. Here we're calculating the 10 smallest numbers. So I have to once again open parentheses, and I have to tell it what data do I want to look at. So that refers to the array. So I'm going to go to site X, and this time I want meals instead of desserts. So I'm going to look at column E for the meals. I'm going to tell it that I want it from the top of the data set to the bottom of the data set. Come up here and hit a comma, and then I need to go to the compare spreadsheet, and I want to return the smallest number. So number 1. So I have to tell it that's the A8, the number 1 that's sitting here in cell A8. We're using a small reference. And so then go ahead and finish the formula, close the parentheses, and hit enter. Now I can copy that formula down. So you can see what the formula looks like. I have site X, and I want to look at just meals from E2 to E108, and I want it to be the smallest number that they've got. So it returned a value of 0. We have some respondents that answered 0. So I'm going to just copy that down all the way to cell D17, so it's going to move that ranking every time from cell A1 to A2 to A3 because I didn't anchor it. So it's going to intuitively move it down. So you can see that we return here this first one, we get a result of 0. The second one we get a result of 0, and then we have A10, which is the next lowest number. Alright, now we need to do the same thing for site Y. So I'm going to use that formula again, equals small, open parentheses. I'm going to go ahead and choose that. Then I'm going to click on site Y and do the same thing. So here's site Y. I'm going to click and hold. I want to get the meals this time, the 10 lowest number of meals. I'm going to choose that. It comes in from E2 to E108. Put a comma here. Then click on your Compare tab. And I have to tell it where I want to rank it. I want to rank the lowest number, so I'm going to choose that, A8. I'm not turning it into an absolute value, so when I copy it down, it will go from cell A1 to A2 to A3. I'm sorry, A8 to A9 to A10. Close your parentheses and hit Enter. And now I can copy that one down. Alright, so we have the lowest number of meals for site X and site Y. Now notice that let's go back and let's look at site X. Let's look at the data in site X. So here's the data set in site X. And we can look and we can see, do we have any zeros in there? So I'm just kind of scrolling. And I have to keep looking. Let me go back to compare. It says site, the lowest number of meals is 0 in site X. And sure enough, we have a number 0 right here in cell 26. So that's kind of what it does. It found a 0 in that data set for the number of meals. And then it set it, and then we asked it to find the second lowest value. And you can see it's hard to find it if you're just kind of looking at it and scrolling through a whole bunch of data. If you had 1,000 lines, it'd become very difficult, wouldn't it? So that's how. Here's another 0 right there on line 12. So that's what it's doing. It says find the smallest number from 1 to 10. And then it's putting that into that compare spreadsheet right here. If we went and we looked at the data set for site X, you can do this on your own. You should be able to find that the highest number of desserts per month by any respondent was 25. The second highest number was 23. So you can hopefully start to see how this is very useful if you're looking at a large set of data. And in this example, you wanted to know what was the highest and smallest numbers that were in the data set. So finally, on step 3 of this assignment, they want you to discuss how these values differ between the data sets and recommend either X or Y for further analysis. So you can come down here in the bottom and you can just write some sort of summary. If you look at all of this information that was returned, what do you notice here? We can see if we compare site X with site Y, that we have an average number of meals for average number of desserts for site Y of 7.23 compared to 6.45 for site X. So slightly more desserts at site Y than we'd see in site X. But the meals, it's a lot more. We have an average of 10.82, and the meals, or the number of meals on site X is 7.44. So that's a pretty good size difference. The standard deviation is just showing you within that whole data set, you're getting a standard deviation. We talked about that just a little bit for the meals and the desserts for each of the sites. So the standard deviation is kind of set. You can look at the curve. If my average is, if we came over here again, if my average is 10.82 and I have a standard deviation of 6, is that what it was? A standard deviation of 6.74, then I can get three spots away on either side of the curve to determine if my data is falling within that normal distribution. Alright, so if I was looking at this and I just have to make a decision, it looks like site Y would make more sense to build a restaurant on. There's more meals that site Y would produce, a little bit more in desserts that they would produce, and that there's actually a 45% difference between the two sites, site Y and site X. So I'm going to decide that I think that there's a slightly higher average number of desserts and even more number of meals purchased at site Y. So it seems to be that site Y would be a better location for this restaurant. So the recommendation would be to at site Y. Okay, so you can just highlight that there. Alright, on step 4, it tells us to add a separate worksheet named Summary and determine the following for the location we selected. So I can see that site Y seems to be a better location. So I'm going to do this last part looking at just site Y information. And it's asking me to make a summary of the total number of respondents, the total number of respondents with incomes above 100,000, the number of respondents that eat fewer than 4 desserts out each month, and the total number of meals eaten out per month, and the total number of desserts per month reported by respondent. So some different things that it's wanting me to do. So I can click here to insert a worksheet. So I'm going to click on that little symbol there and insert a worksheet here at the bottom. I'm going to double click on that and I'm going to call it Summary. I'm going to rename it and call it Summary. Alright, so the first thing it did is ask me to, I'm going to give myself a line there. I need the total number of respondents. I need the total number of respondents with incomes at or above 100,000. So I'm just typing in that criteria there. The next thing it asked me to do is to look at the total number of respondents who had less than 4 desserts out each month. And then I need to look at the total number of meals per month reported by respondents. And then finally the total number who are in the 30 to 35 age category, or in the age 26 to 30 category. Okay, so that's some pretty long descriptions there. I can go ahead and use that Alt-Enter key to have this wrap. I'm going to make this column A a little bit bigger. I'm just grabbing the line between A and B. Click and hold and drag it across. And we'll see what we get there. So I don't want it to be super, and I can see that all of my data won't fit in there. So I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger. And this one's okay, the first one's okay. I'm going to go ahead and break this right here, at or above. So I'm going to say incomes at or above. I'm going to put my cursor up here in the formula bar. Click on that so I have that flash in between incomes and the word at. Hold my Alt key down and hit Enter, and that will make it wrap. Okay, so that's one way to wrap. I'm going to do that again. Less than 4 desserts. I'm going to put that here. Hold my Alt key down and hit Enter, and it will make that wrap. You can also wrap text like this. So a couple of ways to do that. I'm going to click on cell 6, and instead of doing the Alt Enter, I can just tell it to wrap the text. And now that puts it nicely. So that's a quick way to do it. A couple of ways to wrap text in Excel. So this is going to be my summary analysis. And we'll see how to format that a little bit. And I'm doing it for group Y or site Y. I'm actually going to call it site Y. And I need the number of the first thing it wants me to answer is the number of respondents that we had on site Y. So I'm going to use, we've used this one before. I'm going to use the count function. So I'm going to hit, I'll make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to type in equals count, open, and there it is. I want equals count, that function. I could have typed it by hand, but if you double click, it puts the information in there on how you need to create the formula. So I want to look at site Y, and I want to look at it for, I'm looking at the number of respondents. So I'm going to go to site Y tab, and I want to count the number of respondents here. So I'm just going to count this from A2 all the way down to probably A108. Hit Enter, and it will return the value of 107. So here's my formula. By hitting enter, it closed the parentheses for me and it calculated it for me. So the number of respondents was 107. Here's my formula count, site-wide tab from cells A2 to A108. Alright, the next data that it asked me to summarize is the total number of respondents with incomes at or above 100,000. So we're going to use a COUNTIF function. So I'm going to equals count if, and there it is, COUNTIF. I'm going to double click that, and I have to give it a range and then a criteria. And you'll notice between the range and the criteria there's a comma. So it's telling you how to set up that formula. So I'm going to do COUNTIF, and I want to look at site Y again, and I'm looking at respondents with incomes at or above 100,000. So I'm going to be looking at the income column that is listed in that data. So I'm going to click on site Y, go to the top. Which column is it that has the income? It's right here, column C. So I want to look. So I have site Y. I want to look at column C, C2 all the way down to C108. And then I have to give it COUNTIF. So I'm going to put a comma. And remember, when you're writing a formula, you never put spaces in there. And now I'm going to tell it count it if it meets this criteria. So now you're going to put the criteria in parentheses. So by the way that you do that, I have C2 to C108 with a comma. And now I put count if it meets this criteria. So the comma is the separator. Count if C2 to C108 meets this criteria. So I'm going to set that criteria in quotation marks. So I'm going to open quotation marks, and I need it to be with incomes at or above 100,000. So I want to know if it's greater than, let me move my cursor out of the way. So the open parentheses is the COUNTIF. I'm telling it what criteria do I need to look at. If it's greater than 100,000. That's my criteria. I want to count it if it's greater than 100,000. By closing that quotation mark, that sets my criteria, and then I close the parentheses, and that tells the program that I'm finished with the formula, and I hit enter. And I did something wrong. Okay, I returned a result of 0, and I know what I did wrong. I needed to be greater than, I'm going to correct this formula, greater than or equal to income of 100,000. So it didn't find anything that was greater than 100,000, but what it asked me to do was the total number of respondents with incomes at 100,000 or above it. So I just needed to put the equal sign. I made that correction. I'm going to hit enter, and it returns a result of 19, which is correct. Alright, so let's look at that formula. So I use the function COUNTIF, and I have to tell it what set of data I'm looking at. So in this case it was site Y, so the site Y tab, C2 to C108, comma, so I'm going to count that data set if anything in that data set is greater than or equal to 100,000. So there's your COUNTIF function. Alright, on row 4 it says we need the total number of respondents who had less than 4 desserts out each month. So kind of the same thing. We're going to COUNTIF. We're going to be looking at the dessert column. So I'm going to start a formula, equals COUNTIF. And you'll notice that it's giving you a hint. It says counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition. Our given condition this time is less than 4 desserts per month. So we're going to use the COUNTIF. I'm going to double click. It came in right here. Double click so it sets it up for me. I need a range, comma. I need to define the range, put a comma, and then specify the criteria. So just like we did up here, we're going to specify the criteria. So this time we're looking at the number of desserts. So we want to look at site Y and get up to where I can see my headings up here. And we want the number of desserts. So COUNTIF site Y, the number of desserts, and we want to know who had less than 4. How many of them have less than 4 desserts a month? Alright, so I set my range, D2 to D108. I'm going to come up here, click on the formula, hit a comma, and now I have to specify the criteria. So, comma, remember no spaces in the formula. I'm going to indicate the criteria in parentheses. So I'm going to put parentheses that are less than this time, less than 4 desserts. I'm going to close that criteria by hitting close, another quotation marks, close the formula by closing the parentheses. We'll close the formula and I hit enter. Alright, so it looked at that whole set of data and it said there were 39 respondents that ate dessert less than 4 times a month. Alright, so the COUNTIF function, we did that twice. We did it here and we did it here. The COUNTIF function, open parentheses, you tell it what cells are you wanting to count, and comma, and then you put in parentheses the criteria that you want. You close the parentheses, and that's how your COUNTIF function works. Alright, the total number of meals per month reported by respondents who earn below $50,000. Alright, so here we want the total number of meals, again, per month reported by respondents who earn below $50,000. So, we're going to sum the number of meals based on some criteria. So this is going to be a nested function here. So I'm going to do it equals sum, and here's our sum function. Double click, and it puts the criteria. I'm going to sum some number to some other number. Alright, so we know that we want site Y. So I'm going to come over here, so I'm working on site Y's data. And I need the number of respondents who reported income below $50,000. So I need here's my income column here. And I want to know how many of those respondents earn less than $50,000. So I want to look at this whole set of data that's sitting in column C. So I'm going to specify that, and you can notice up here as I'm scrolling that I'm getting that in my formula up there, specifying the cells that I want to look at. And then I put a comma in there. I got my cells. So I'm going to sum site Y, C2 to C108, hit a comma, and then I have to tell it the criteria. And so I want to sum it if their salaries are less than $50,000. So I'm going to put the criteria, always goes in quotes. So we want less than $50,000. Close the quotes. And then we're going to have another function. We need site Y again. For E2, I'm going to come up here to the top. For the number of meals, for the ones that ate that certain number of meals. Yeah, what we're doing, I'm looking at this again on page 158. So the total number of meals eaten per month reported by respondents who earn below $50,000. So I was setting the criteria. I need to look at just the ones that earn less than $50,000, and then the number of meals eaten for those people that earn less than $50,000. So then I can go ahead and I've got E2 to E108, which is the meals eaten per month. I'm going to close that parentheses and hit enter. Alright, setting a good example here, making a mistake here. So I'm going to look and see. I'm going to look at my formula because I got an error. So what did I do wrong? I told it to sum. Oh, I see what I did wrong. I used sum and I needed to use sum if. So I just used sum. I said add something together if it meets this criteria, but I didn't use sum if. So I'm going to just come up here and type in sum if here. And then I can correct that and hit enter. Alright, so the total number of meals per month reported by respondents who earn below $50,000. So my formula said to sum if, I need to look at the income of those that are sitting in column C, which was the income column, for those that are earning less than $50,000. So the way that you read this is sum if, cell C2 to C108, and I'm going to look at just the $50,000 range, and so that sum if, I'm going to put that in quotes, comma separates it out and then sum it for those that meet that $50,000 range. I want to know what that sum is from E2 to E108. Close the parentheses and it will return your result of 825. All right, this last one is a big formula. So here we're looking at the total number of desserts per month reported by respondents who are in the 30 to 35 age category or in the age 26 to 30 category. So here you're going to see how to nest a couple of functions together, a couple of criteria together, and you can see how that works. All right, so we're going to start that formula. We're going to sum if the total number of desserts per month for people that are in the certain age category, two different age categories. So once again, I need a sum if, and here we go. Here it is, the sum if. And it's giving me an example here. I have to specify a range and then a criteria. And then it will sum that range for you. So we want site Y, sum if, open parentheses, and now I have to specify the range. So I'm going to click on site Y, and we're looking at income again. So I'm looking at age categories, I'm looking at the age categories. So in this criteria, site Y, I want to look at the age for all of these people. So I'm going to set that criteria. So I'm telling the formula that I want to look at column B, basically. Column B, and then I'm going to put a comma up here in the formula. And when I do that, you can see it's bringing up my formula help here. So sum if the range, and then I need some criteria. And we always put criteria in parentheses. I'm sorry, in quotes. So the criteria, comma, the criteria, put that in quotes. I want 30 to 35 age range, close that criteria. And I also want to look at, so for 30 to 35, I want to sum the number of desserts that they eat per month. So I need to come back up, and for that age, I need the number of desserts. So I'm just grabbing that cell of that range of cells for D2 to D2 to D108, and that is my first set of criteria that I want to look at. So I'm going to close the parentheses, and I could almost be done with that, and it would return a result to me. But remember, the instructions said I wanted the 30 to 35 age group, and I also want the 26 to 30 age group. So now I'm going to add that together. So I also need it for another group of people. So now I'm going to write continue the formula and write some more criteria. So plus the sum if, and here I just typed it in because I knew what it was, but it brings up the help. And I want to look at site Y again. I'm in site Y already. I want to look at column B one more time. This time we're going to set our criteria for ages 26 to 30. So I'm going to have it look at that cell again. When I do that, I'm going to tell it site Y. I want to look at column B, comma, and then I have to set my criteria. Remember, no spaces when you're writing these formulas. You don't hit your space bar. So I'm going to have an open quote, and this time I want it to be 26 to 30. Close the quote, and I want to look at the number of desserts that the 26 to 30 group ate, or purchased. I guess it would be purchased. So I'm going to look at for that criteria. I'm going to set that set of cells, close the parentheses, and I'm done, and hit enter. And it returns a figure of 263 desserts that were purchased in those two age groups. So let's look at this really quick. So I have sum if site Y, so this is their age group. Column B was their ages 30 to 35, and I want it to sum if they met that criteria, 30 to 35. Then I'm going to add all of the desserts that they bought. Then I'm going to add, and I'm going to sum if that same criteria, they were 26 to 30. Then I want to add all of that together. If they meet that criteria, 26 to 30, then I want to add it together. And when we do that, it returns this result of 263. So there's a nested function. Okay, the final step of this homework assignment, it says, is to include appropriate titles, labels, and formatting so that the worksheets are easy to read. Something that you can do with this to make it look a little better is maybe make that a little wider for that first one. We could draw a box around this. So I'm going to click and hold here, and in my home group I've got draw borders, and I'm just going to include outside borders so that this whole thing, when I looked at it, if I went ahead and I viewed that, remember your pull down menu here, I have my quick my print preview. It's right here, print preview, and I can see what that looks like. So all it did was draw a box around it. Okay, I might want to insert a row between that and the heading. Maybe I want to make that a little bit bigger. Remember how we did that? I can format that cell and say that it's a heading. And maybe I want to center that for site Y. I'm going to turn that whole thing into a heading there. So we have summary analysis for site Y. So maybe that looks a little bit better. So different formatting. I'm going to leave it to you to format these other ones that are in here. You can draw some boxes around them if you like. Make those stand out a little bit more. You could draw a box around this whole thing. That's one calculation. And once you select that, it retains the one that you selected, so I can just click on it once and it will draw a box around that. And here we can maybe do the same thing, draw a box around that, just to kind of separate it visually when you're looking at it. If I looked at that, you'll notice that it's going on to 2 pages. That looks pretty awful. So it's always good in Excel to view what you're doing. And I can scale that so that it will fit onto 1 page. I could either scale it or maybe I could turn it into landscape. When I do that, what does it look like? Then I kind of get this. So depending on what you want to do, I can scale it, change it back to portrait, and tell it to all fit the sheet on 1 page. Makes it really small. So I actually think I won't do any scaling, and that I'll keep it and I'll put it in a landscape orientation because that will make it a little easier to read. So different things that you can do to make it look better. Alright, so make sure you save your work. We had already saved it La Rosa Demographics. So I'm going to just click my quick save button up here. You can also do a file and save as. If I was going to turn this in for homework, I would rename it. Actually, it would be Perez Y. And it would be Perez Y Chapter 2. Level 2 homework assignment, and I would hit save. Then go back and submit it. So then we'll go back to Blackboard, and I'd have to go in as a student and go ahead and submit that.